Anyone who believes in indefinite growth on a physically finite planet is either mad or an economist.
We don't want to focus politics on a notion that involves the rejection of principles around which a large majority of our fellow citizens organize their lives.
We are not as endlessly manipulable and as predictable as you would think.
We always say go cradle to boost innovation and a responsible business. Desso is a Dutch company leading in carpet tiles, particularly in Europe, and in artificial grass pitches. 80% of our business is carpets, the majority being business carpets. We also are a market leader in consumer carpets in the Netherlands, and 20% of the total business is sports. Our key strategy, next to a couple of others, is innovation. And we have three drivers of innovation. And the first is creativity. When we bought the company back in April 2007, it was an excellent company in terms of quality and service, but it was a little bit in terms of design. So we erected circles of architects in all our key countries. The second driver of innovation is functionality. I come back to that. But the third driver of innovation happens to be cradle to cradle. And in the cradle to cradle concept, you make products of such pure materials that you can endlessly recycle them, which is very important, and you make them for easy disassembly. Now, this helped us to focus the whole cradle to cradle philosophy on indoor air quality. Michael Braungart always says that the average indoor air quality is 3 to 8 times worse than the outside air quality. And that is because of VOCs, but also because of fine dust. And in a room, that is a study from the German Asthma Association, a scientific study from 2005, in a room with hard floors, the level of fine dust in the air is 2 to 3 times higher than in a room with carpets. And this is why cradle to cradle is an innovation concept, because as a result of this knowledge, we asked our R&D people to develop a carpet tile which is much better than other carpet to contain fine dust. And after 35 years of recommending hard floors for asthma patients, the German Asthma Association is now recommending carpets. So this is a straightforward innovation which comes from the fact that we went cradle to cradle. Why did we go cradle to cradle? Well, first, cradle to cradle is a good positive quality initiative. It's not only good for the environment, but also good for innovation and health. And waste becomes food for other products. But cradle to cradle is also a business building opportunity, good for profit. We did this since January 2008. Our market share went up from 15 to 23% in the European carpet tile market, and our profitability went up from 1 to 3 to 4.5 to 6 and now 9.5% EBIT. I'm saying this not in order to brag, also a little bit, but in order to give credibility to the cradle-to-cradle concept, because I want more companies and industry to embrace this concept, because we need to go from a linear economy where we produce waste for landfill or for incineration, for burning. We need to go from a linear economy to a circular economy, because all our precious raw materials are in a lot of products today, and that is where we need to get them from. So eco-efficiency is fine, it's about lower carbon footprint, but what is much nicer to do and much better is eco-effectiveness. Because now your footprint can be very big, because everything which is in your footprint is made of pure materials, so that you can endlessly, safely recycle or upcycle it. And so we want our products to be like that tree. Everything that falls down from the tree or blows away is being reused by microorganisms, plants, insects, animals, or what have you. And you can either do that in the biosphere or in the technosphere. Use renewable energy in all stages of the cycle is an integral part of our strategy. In 2020, all of our products need to be cradle to cradle, but in 2020 it also will be that all the energy that is used by Desso will be wind, sun, biomass fermentation and geothermal energy. And I tell you, it can be done. This is an example of the technical cycle. In artificial grass, we will have cradle-to-cradle artificial grass pitches which we can take back, we melt, we make yarn, and we lay it again. And in the biological cycle, we are now working on a 2-year program to make our woolen carpets completely biodegradable. And then we can take it back and pelletize it and spread it over agricultural land. If You make products of very pure materials, that's all very nice, but it only makes sense if you have a take-back system. So we now have a recycling business unit which we call take-back system Refinity, and we take back carpet tiles from everybody, from competition, from any manufacturer, from old offices, old institutions, and we have developed proprietary technology, a machine, which separates the yarn from the backing. Left you have the yarn, on the right side you have the bitumen. The bitumen we sell to the road industry and the roofing industry, or the cement industry, and the yarn, and now comes the nice part of the story, goes back to one of our yarn manufacturers who, inspired by our cradle-to-cradle technology, has invested 20 million euro in a depolymerization plant in Slovenia. And there you have 2 empty Tesco's full of old yarn, old fishing nets, and old polyamide 6, and he churns that through his plant, and the end product is caprolactam. And normally he buys caprolactam from the oil industry or the chemical industry. And now he makes it from old stuff. He makes yarn out of that again, and we use that yarn again. And today, 60% of the carpet tiles we sell use 100% recycled yarn from this plant. So this is the circular economy in action. This is, I can add here 10 circles around. This is not stopping. This has started, and I can tell you there are more and more companies and institutions who embrace this concept and who understand that there is no future without a circular economy. This is great to build a business with, but I can tell you that the employee satisfaction level in our company is going up and up, because it's good to make a nice design, it's good to make a nice carpet and make turnover and profit, but it feels good to do good.
When you set off to race around the world, you take with you a finite number of resources. You have to, else you stand no chance of breaking a record or winning a race. And when you leave, you manage them. You manage them because you only have so much diesel. You manage them because you only have so much food. And you get this overwhelming notion of what the definition finite really means. Because the nearest fuel station is 2,500 miles away. Yet when you sail around the world, you can step off at the finish and refuel. And never had I made that connection with our life on land. Because we can't step off and refuel and gain more resources. And I guess in a way it's like picking up a stone and seeing something underneath it and having 2 choices. You either put that stone back down and pretend you see nothing and carry on with your dream job, or you put it to one side and you start to learn. And 5 years ago, I began that journey of learning. I spoke to everyone from CEOs to school children to farmers to scientists to experts to learn about the resources that we have, to learn about our futures. And something struck me, and that was if you take a finite resource out of the ground and use it in a linear system where we make something out of it, and then dump that resource at the end, you're sitting in a linear system that can never work in the long term because it's a straight line. And if you do that better and try and be more efficient, and you take that resource and use it more efficiently, and the people I spoke to were looking at efficiency and trying to use things more efficiently, you realize ultimately you end up in the same place. You still end up with that empty hole in the ground, but you've just bought yourself more time. And I'd made that decision to leave sailing behind me. So what do I do with that? Do I sail around the world with a message on another boat? I knew that wasn't right. What do you actually do about this? And for me, life had always been about a goal. And in the years, I started to meet different people, like Stef, like Desso, who were thinking differently, who were thinking about a different system. If you think about business models, think about a washing machine. Currently, when we buy a washing machine, it sits in a linear system. Each machine has the minimum in it that you can get away with to make a machine that will last 6 years. It's not designed to be repaired, and it's not designed to go back to the manufacturer. But if you look at the copper price that went up by 30% last year, and you look at the fact if you're a manufacturer, as Stef talks about, you want those materials back, then you even start to question business models. You start to look at the big picture. It's not just about products. If you think about Scotland, for example, and I've spoken to the government there, they reckon with their food waste, they can power a city the size of Dundee for a year, and they can fertilise 20% of their farms right across Scotland. But what if their packaging was designed differently? What if the system was designed differently? Because food waste is one thing we have now. Well, this is a plastic bag, but it's not plastic. Because rather than this sitting in a bin being something negative, a bin full of these is something positive. Because it's designed to be non-toxic, it's designed to re-enter the system, to biodegrade and fertilize farmland. What if we redesigned the whole system of waste? And that's what the circular economy is. It's designing out waste out of the system entirely from both a biological perspective and also from a technical perspective. And it's not just about products. It's about opportunities. It's about creativity. It's about having a goal to aim for. When you redesign a whole system, there are tremendous opportunities involved for young people, for businesses that currently sit out there with huge challenges that face them today, tied to these resources that sit within a linear system. My great-grandfather was born 117 years ago, yet I sat on his knee until I was 11 years old. When he was born, there were 25 cars in the road in the entire world. When he was 9, we flew for the first time in history. Yet by the time he died, we had personal computers in our houses, and the mobile phone had just been invented. The world is changing so quickly. The world is evolving so quickly, and it makes you realize just why anything truly is possible. We could have an idea here in this room today, and it could be anywhere in the world in 1 second. We never had that opportunity before. And it's that opportunity that brought me to set up the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. The goal of the Ellen MacArthur Foundation is to inspire a generation to rethink, redesign, and build a positive future, to seize that opportunity which is out there, to redesign a system that can be restorative, that can build capital, and a system that really can work. So if I could sum up in one word what success looks like and what the foundation does, I use a story of an A-level student that we'd been working with. We'd done some development work with his teacher, and he'd gone up to his teacher and he said, "Sir, when I did my GCSEs, I couldn't think of anything to design. Now, having learnt about the circular economy, I look at everything and I want to redesign it."
We've seen an extraordinary acceleration of the take-up of interest in green building, of low-carbon building. We've had some very important policy interventions that have helped this on its way. We saw at the end of 2006 the introduction of a code for sustainable homes. The first time the government had actually said, this is where we're going in policy terms, this is where we're going in regulatory terms. You have to do not just incrementally better, but you have to make a step change. And along with that, the target that all new homes would have to be zero carbon from 2016. This was a change that really did send builders back to the drawing board. This wasn't fiddling at the edges anymore. This was a fundamental revolution in the way that people had to think about buildings. And I often say that this is as much a psychological revolution as a technological one. Because the UK Green Building Council is driven by business, we've had some remarkable traction. Ministers aren't used to hearing a radical environmental sustainability agenda from leading businesses, and that's what we've been able to muster. Sometimes people say to me, do you ever question the motives of these companies? Do you ever question how pure their motives are? To which my answer is no. I think their motives are purely about more profit. I think they're looking to grow their businesses. The fact that they want to grow them in a green way is a bonus. The question is, can we really decouple growth from the traditional byproducts of increasing carbon emissions and the unsustainable use of natural resources? We've got some very helpful policy drivers still in the UK. We've got a government, the previous government, who enshrined carbon reductions in law with the Climate Change Act. We have targets that commit us to a 50% reduction by 2025, en route to an 80% reduction by 2050. These are world-leading targets. For that reason, it saddens me that George Osborne last week chooses to deny our global leadership in this area. I would instead urge him to embrace the opportunity for global leadership, the opportunity to create jobs, the opportunity to create economic activity, energy security, and affordable warmth for generations to come. Although we have learned remarkable ways, or I should say really rediscovered remarkable ways of building more green and sustainable buildings. We now can build buildings that generate more power, more energy than they consume, that are self-sufficient in water, are far more sustainable in their use of natural resources. But we do have a problem, because when we project forward to that wonderful point at 2050 where we've reduced our carbon emissions by 80% at least, the problem is that 80% of the buildings standing will be ones that we're living and working in today. So we can't simply redesign new buildings. We have to redesign the built environment that we already have. We used to think of our buildings, and of course many people around the world still think of buildings as shelters, places that keep them warm, dry and safe. We have massively complicated our buildings. They're complex, and as a result they're costly to build and they're costly to run. But even more so, in a place like the UK, we've burdened them with all sorts of other expectations. Our homes are increasingly becoming our pensions. And if we're fortunate enough, they're becoming the inheritance to pass on, rather ironically, to our children who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford a home. Something has gone wrong here. Perhaps we need to unpack our obsession with ownership. In other areas of our life, our cars, our smartphones, we now choose to lease these products, precisely because innovation is happening so fast that it actually is outpacing our ability to afford to buy things outright. How could we apply that thinking to our homes? What if somebody else took care of our homes? What about if somebody else, in return for our monthly payment, took care of the refurbishment of our homes and could integrate the new innovation, the new technology to drive the efficiency of our homes as and when it occurs, using the economies of scale that we can't possibly harness if we're acting on our own? The construction industry loves a project, and what I'd offer to you is the project that we now have in front of us is to build Great Britain for 2050. That means we have to rethink our individual buildings, our communities and our cities, but I think it's a very exciting challenge.
Fundamentally, money is the energy, or one of the energies that makes all of this happen. And if one thing that sort of has stuck in people's minds after the financial crisis, it was where Adair Turner, the chairman of the Financial Services Authority, talked about financial innovation that had not been socially useful. And if we need one thing in order to help us make the sort of changes that we've been talking about today, it is financial innovation that is socially useful. UCSIF, the Sustainable Investment and Finance Association, was 20 years old this year. And one thing we highlighted as part of our celebration was that actually the really tough 20 years were not going to be the last 20 years, but the next 20. Because if you look ahead 20 years, what international agencies say is not only have we got the challenges that we've been talking about here today, but also the expectation is that we will need 50% more food, there will be 50% as much energy use, and demand for 30% as much water at the same time as we are mitigating and adapting to climate change. Those figures relate to expectations for 20 years' time, for 2030. And if you look at through the lens of that world in 2030, what you see is that what makes money will be different, that there will be huge opportunities to invest in innovations and new developments, but there will also be huge opportunities to lose out as a result of not recognizing the risks, the social and environmental risks that are coming down the line. But underpinning that is a huge need to reallocate capital, both to support the sort of new business models that we're talking about, and also to support the sort of replumbing of economies that underpins them, the sort of replumbing that enables sustainable energy to be distributed, that enables the grid of smart meters, that enables access to electric cars, that provides the sort of underpinning for some of the stuff that Stef was talking about. There is expertise within the finance sector to make that happen, but the challenge is, as ever, it's about a systemic change. And in order to move things, what the finance sector also needs is two other groups, particularly, to take action. One group is governments, public policy makers, the people who create the frameworks. They also need demand from their customers to invest in sustainable ways. If we look at what government is doing, I mean, others will talk about the frameworks around individual investment opportunities. But the things that I would particularly highlight is the stuff that government is doing specifically to affect investment. And in the UK, I think we have two very positive developments going on. One is, as has been referred to previously, the Green Investment Bank, which is the world's first development bank specifically for the transition to a low-carbon, resource-efficient economy, which the government has set up with an initial £3 billion of capitalisation. The second significant development, which I think is another example of UK leadership, is the Kay Review. So John Kay has been asked by the Business Secretary to do a review of UK equity markets, of UK public markets and stocks and shares, in terms of how well they support the long-term competitiveness of UK industry, because many going back for quite some time have highlighted the degree to which short-termism in investment decision-making is a major inhibitor in this area. So we're very enthusiastic about the Kay Review and the potential for the Kay Review to set a way forward that could be followed by the rest of the world in ensuring that financial markets better support the long term. But that's the public policy side. That's what government is doing. What I wanted to wrap up by was to talk about what companies could do. And I think there's two things that companies should be particularly doing in this area. Too often companies complain that the financial markets do not value their moves to long-term sustainability. What I say in that instance is don't just talk to the financial markets, talk to the customers of the financial markets. And the customers of the financial markets are your pension funds and your employees. Help your employees to understand why it makes sense to invest their savings for the long term. Then you will succeed and start seeing change within the financial markets. The second challenge, though, to companies, and in a way this is the same challenge as the challenge to Ellen, which is to say, get in there and compete with them. That all the theory about disruptive innovation says that it is actually very difficult for incumbents within any industry to actually change the way that industry operates. There is huge opportunities now for businesses in other industries to move into financial services and to find it easier to do financial services for the long term. And my challenge to Ellen is some of your bright young people who are redesigning things, get some of them redesigning financial services.
Who's winning this? Is the fact that we have so much stuff that we seem to need to change all the time a more powerful force than the fact that so many more businesses seem to be taking this seriously?
One thing that I've learnt through this journey is a lot of it is actually about design. If you design a product, carpet is not a product you keep in your house forever, especially not an industrial carpet. It goes in an office for a few years and then it gets changed. That carpet is designed to be made again, and Desso's goal, I think, is by 2020, that's 100% renewable energy. If you make something that is made to be made again using renewable energy, then actually the fact that you do change it means that there's an easier process to get that back to the manufacturer. Now, we can't say that everyone in the world can have 10 TVs and 10 phones and everything else, but it's a design philosophy. What design studio's first brief is, we need this product to be designed to be made again. What you're trying to do is sell a product to be as sexy as possible, and you know that in the technology field it's not going to last for that long, because they never do, because technology evolves. It's about asking the designer the right question at the beginning. Because when we work with young people, they are fascinated by innovation and they are fascinated by technology and they want to be creative. And I think it's, what's the brief for them? Is the brief to them to say, your goal is to have the smallest footprint possible and do nothing in your lives? Because then they question, should we even be here at all? Or is their brief to be creative, rethink everything that's around them and actually restore and build capital, which you have the opportunity to do with biological nutrients, for example. So seeing it as an opportunity and a design question, I think, is the key.
Where do you find the most resistance in your work? Is it, are there particular professional groups or the government or particular businesses? Which are the kind of conversations that you go into with the greatest sense of foreboding?
I don't think I go into it with the greatest sense of foreboding, but I think that one of the biggest problems is the fact that the current model we have has actually worked quite well for people. 10 years ago, it struck me that we need to revolutionise the way that we built new homes. The trouble is that house builders were still making an awful lot of money out of building them the old way. The system wasn't telling them, sorry, game's over. You know, I mean, for a very long time, my philosophy on this has been, you know, here comes the kind of consumer juggernaut down the road. You know, the instinct of the typical environmentalist is to want to leap out in front of it, put the hand up and say, stop! You know, and normally the result is they get flattened. But for me, I suppose the challenge has always been, can you run fast enough to sort of jump on board the juggernaut and try and steer it into a safer direction, which I think is towards the closed-loop economy that we've been talking about. I think the longer-term question, if you like, whether or not you can then put your foot on the brake through education. Can you actually say to people, do you really need to consume as much, as often as you do? Is it really adding to your quality of life? Or in fact, has it just become a kind of an obsessive behaviour? And that's the question that's the big unknown. And I think many companies, Marks and Spencer's were talking about this recently, they can see the next step. They can see where people will want ever more information about where their suits came from, where their food packaging is going. But what when their customers start saying, do you know what, I don't actually want to consume as much anymore? What does their business model look like then? Because it could mean falling off a cliff.
The how you meet emotional needs is the really successful long-term business model. The key things about cars was about the emotional attachment that people had to the car and that young people had to cars. And the theory is that that emotional attachment has now moved on to sort of sexy technology that you carry around with you. And so one of the challenges is how can you design things that replace the emotional attachments to the status quo?